I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 109 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs. Conformément à l'article 108.2.
Pursuant to Standing Order 108.2 and the motions adopted by the committee on March 9, 2023 and on December 5th, 2023, the committee is resuming its study on recognizing Persian Gulf and wartime service veterans. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, and I would like all participants to pose their questions through the chair.
Members of the committee, that we have confirmation of 2 ministers for this study, Veterans Affairs and Defense. So they're gonna come here on. Anciens combattants, ce sera le 28 octobre.
For Veterans Affairs, it will be the 28th, and for Defense, that would be on the 31st for this study. I would also like to remind members of the committee that during questions and comments, you have time that will be allocated to you. And I would ask you to also time yourselves, because we do tend to go over time, but I will have to stop you. I will let you know when you have 1 minute left, but once we're down to 0, I will have to stop you and give the floor to someone else.
Welcome one of our colleagues, MP Charlie Angus, who replaces Ms. Blenny. Et avant de passer.
And before I give the floor to Monsieur Desilets, I wanted to share with members, for the second hour, we have only 1 witness.
Or we have 2 witnesses. I think it should be okay to have an hour and 15 minutes with those 2 witnesses and 45 minutes with the other one. Is that okay? Or would you like to have an hour, first hour and second hour with the second witness? Because he's alone. Yeah? Okay. Or you can ask if you want. I heard that you say that if we can have 3 together for 2 hours.
We've got Mr. Summers.
Yes.
And we've got
on the web.
Mr. Summers on the web.
Yeah, Mr. Miller. And for the second hour, we have
the witnesses, whatever the witnesses prefer.
Yeah. It's up to you guys, and it's also up to the witnesses. I think it's here. Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think? Would you like to be on the... No? Okay. So let's go with an hour and 15 minutes and 45 minutes with the other witness, right? Okay. Monsieur Desilets, vous avez une question?
Oui. Monsieur Desilets? Yes, I wanted to ask the clerk regarding timing for the 2 ministers. Is it 2 hours? And when will be the next meeting in November?
Tout ce que je peux vous dire pour l'instant.
I can say that for the first hour of the 28th, we would have the Minister for Veterans Affairs. For the second hour, we could hear from other witnesses or do other work. And then on the 31st, for the first hour, we would have the Minister of National Defense. So 1 hour each. And we should be finished on Thursday for our study. Mr. Chair, what would we be doing for the second hours of both of those meetings? I would like for us to have 15 minutes to discuss the letter that we received, and I would like for us to do this in camera. So that is one thing. We have a list of studies that we could start. So for the 28th of October, we will take the second hour in camera to discuss committee business, and we can decide from then. Thank you.
To welcome our witnesses. As individual, we have by video conference Vice Admiral retired Duncan Miller, Commander of the Canadian Naval Forces and Allied Combat Logistic Commander. And I have to tell members of the committee that we have some technical problems with the system of Mr. Miller. So we're going to try and we're going to ask the interpreters if they are okay with that. But if not, we have all of his notes so we can, in both languages, we will share everything to you. And in the room with us, Rear Admiral retired Ken Summers, Commander of the Canadian Forces in the Middle East. So we're going to start with Mr. Summers. You have 5 minutes for your opening statement, and after that we're going to go into Mr. Miller. So, Mr. Summers, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I am Ken Summers, retired admiral, and during the Gulf War, I was the commander of all the Canadian forces in the Middle East, the operational command, the aircraft, the ships, the hospitals, all that. And I'm very pleased that, in fact, you've made additional time for this testimony because I now can be here as opposed to not making it. And I'd like to give my perspective, I guess, what happened in the Gulf War from a very personal perspective. The bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, is that the Gulf War was a war. It was not a peacekeeping operation, as some people have suggested. I should have brought a piece of the Scud missile that fell at Bahrain near my headquarters to emphasize the point, or perhaps the bullet that went in the sand very close to where I was when I was up in Kuwait City following the liberation. Anyways, it's the Iraqi invasion going back occurred on the 2nd of August, 1990, and then immediately the UN Security Council, which Canada was a member of the Security Council in those days, was passed a number of resolutions, and Canada was very, very active in those discussions. In fact, our ambassador, Yves Fortier, was co-sponsored or was a number of the resolutions. And I do recall, because I was watching this extremely carefully from Halifax, he made a statement which has always stuck with me. He said, sometimes you have to make the peace in order to keep the peace. And that's something that was and turned out to be very, very true as things developed later on in January 1991. Well, last week, for the first time, I had an opportunity, that was mentioned to one of your members, that I had an opportunity to actually go into Hansard and see what was happening on January 15th and January 16th. I was at the other end, and I would tell you that, and I phoned back to Ottawa, and they said, well, they're still debating whether we should even be here. And I said, well, they better hurry up because in about 2 hours' time, something is going to happen that's going to put this all behind us. In any event, it did occur, and those meetings were, those discussions were very interesting. Video and Hansard on the 15th of January showed that the Prime Minister, among others, made the point that they passed resolutions, but if the deadline was approaching at midnight, and if in fact if they did not withdraw from Iraq, that in fact it was incumbent upon the members of the United Nations to actually enforce the resolution. So that set the stage, and I immediately, in fact, on that point, I noted that on the 16th, when it occurred, there was some discussion still going on. One of the members of the Parliament actually came into the House and said, I've seen video that the war has already started, and that got the ball going. Very shortly thereafter, actually, the Prime Minister came back in and said, ladies and gentlemen, we are now with our allies taking action against Saddam Hussein in Iraq to enforce the resolution. I noted, quite correctly, that the leader of the opposition, Jean Chrétien, very quickly arose and said, well, he had been talking about enforcing the embargo, letting embargo and those things continue on. Very quickly he got up and said, we are behind what's going on over there, and we support the Canadian forces and our troops over there. So it was really quite something. Shortly thereafter, the government formed a war cabinet. and that consisted of the Prime Minister as the head, plus a number of the senior ministers, and the Chief of Defense Staff, John DeShasson, which I would recommend you get him to come to talk to you. John DeShasson was there at those particular meetings. And what happened with those War Cabinet, we in fact provided the information to the War Cabinet of what was going on in the Gulf, and in return, they would in fact give us the direction in terms of where we could operate and what type of action we could be taking as things went on. So it was a two-way street. We were providing the information to them, and when it required their approval and operations, they came back and gave us to that, including areas of operation and also the type of weapons that could be used. To the 4,000 Canadian that were deployed over there during that particular time, our ships, the aircraft squadrons, the hospital, security and support, the hostilities over there was in fact a daily reality. Our ships, which Admiral Miller, when he comes on, will no doubt discuss in greater detail, were instrumental in the interdiction operations that took place in the Gulf prior to actual hostilities, with, in fact, Canada only about 5% of the interdiction ships, but in fact, we ended up doing in excess of 25% of all the boardings in the Gulf, and quite honestly, we were in the central middle Gulf. 1 minute?
Yeah, continue. But we will ask you questions after that. Go, please, Mr.
Okay, well,
Summers.
great. So they were there, and the aircraft, I got to mention the aircraft, the F-18s, which people believe were just flying over the ships in the Gulf and protecting them. In actual fact, they did an awful lot more. They started doing that, but then they were moved up to the head of the Gulf, and were right off Kuwait City in the operations there. In fact, the station they had was called codename Brown, and it was Americans named that after the World War I ace, Canadian World War I ace, Roy Brown. That's how we got that. Well, they did those operations right off Kuwait at the CAP station, Close Air Patrol. And then when the requirement came to actually conduct fighter operations and bombing missions over Iraq and Kuwait, we were asked to provide the close air support, the so-called sweep and escort missions, by means which they went ahead of the attacking force and with the attacking force going over Kuwait and Iraq. And that was a tremendous thing. Then towards the end, they got into doing air to ground, and that, again, air to sand perhaps, but in any event, it was a mission. And I would point out very proudly that of all the aircraft over there, it was only the Canadians that did all three missions with the same aircraft and the same pilots, and that was a testimony to the professionalism of our Air Force. All the time, of course, there was...
I'm sorry, Commander, I know that you have gone through a lot of things and as a commander, but you will, yes, I have a point of order, yes.
I would say, we've only got two witnesses an hour and 50 minutes. I would be comfortable. Let's give him a few more minutes. He's obviously got a very unique perspective as commander of our forces there. I think it would be nice to give him a few more minutes.
Me too. I already, like I said at the beginning, it was 5 minutes, and I give him 6 minutes. So if members of the committee would like to, I know that we're going to have 2 or 3 rounds of questions, but Mr. Summers, I think that the committee would like you to continue with your testimony. Please, go ahead.
Another 5 minutes? Got it. Okay. Well, anyways, so the aircraft were doing great things, and we had an 707 air refueler, and that aircraft proved to be absolutely invaluable as it was providing fuel not only to our own F-18s, but also to the other Allied aircraft as they went in and over Kuwait and Iraq and back out again. I have to mention the field hospital, because the field hospital was sent over there, and it basically was stationed at Al Jubail, which was on the Persian Gulf. But when war started, they went out to the west to a place called Al Kazuma, right on the Saudi-Kuwait border. And when they were there setting it up, they came under Scud attack, and they were the ones that looked after not only Allied but also Iraqi injured people coming to that headquarters. It was really quite something. In fact, the number of Iraqis coming there, because they were given up, our security force that went with them became very much the guards of all the POWs until they could in fact send them elsewhere. Finally, I guess someone mentioned this, but the mining that took place on the shores of Kuwait City and also at the airport was absolutely incredible. And it was our engineers that went there and were able to clear the shores and, in fact, the airfield of booby trap bunkers with ammunition and all sorts of stuff. I proudly would also say that other allies were not quite as lucky, but I put it down to our professionalism and our training of our soldiers that, in fact, no one ever got hurt doing those mining operations. I would also finally say, and I mentioned this, there was a Scud attack on the headquarters in Bahrain. Suffice to say, ladies and gentlemen, this was not peacekeeping. It was no one on the Navy, Air, or soldiers were killed. I believe this was really much a case because we had worked very hard at training, and they were extremely well trained and prepared prior to, in fact, going over there. We had luck, to be sure, and other allies weren't so lucky. But in fact, they were able to conduct operations there, and we came back with everybody, basically. Now, notwithstanding all that, there was something out there called Gulf War Syndrome, which we didn't understand at the time, honest to God, and subsequently became something called PTSD. And that's something that we tried to figure out what it was, didn't know, and subsequently, when we came back, obviously PTSD, amongst others, was something that was known, and I'm sure there's people that were in the Gulf that, in fact, still suffer from PTSD. I think all the airmen, sailors, and women, airwomen, and the soldiers involved in the Gulf would tell you that this was not a peacekeeping mission. It was war, pure and simple, and those who were there knew it, and they and their families back home knew it and felt it. I have remained surprised that, in fact, the Canadian, I didn't realize this, had not recognized the Gulf as a war. I encourage the ACVA to give long overdue recognition to those brave Canadians that served. I note that all three ships and all three aircraft squadrons received battle honors, which means that they were involved in participation in a battle with formed and armed enemy, thus meriting the classification of wartime service. To not do so, to me, sets a bad example and an unwelcome message to those who serve our country in uniform. That is my another 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
And I'm quite prepared to answer any question you might have.
Great.
Thank
you, Mr. Summers. And okay, so now we're going to try with Mr. Duncan Miller on the web, on Zoom. So the floor is yours for your statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Hopefully you can hear me. Good afternoon, distinguished members of AVAC. I'm here to support the President and Vice President of the Persian Gulf War Veterans of Canada's attempts to have the Government of Canada acknowledge that the Gulf War, 1990-91, was indeed a war, and that they all and all veteran participants in that war be acknowledged as war veterans. I was shocked that at a previous session of your committee, an Assistant Deputy Minister of Veterans Affairs declared that the Canadian government does not define the Gulf War 1990-91 as a war. The senator who asked the question replied that the committee could therefore pack up and dispose of the issue. I believe he needed to ask why in order to understand the government's position. In response, I'd be happy to elaborate on why it should be termed a war and provide answers to your policy questions, which arose in previous sessions. I can provide the naval operations information as the commander of the naval forces and the Allied Combat Logistic Force formed during the war. I'm delighted that Admiral Summers is there in person, as he was the Joint Force Commander. So between us, we should be able to answer all your policy questions. In 1990, the Canadian government authorized the Navy to send 3 warships to the Gulf area to participate in the war. Initially, we were authorized to conduct interdiction operations in the Gulf of Oman. Post-January 91, we were authorized to operate in the Central Gulf area. And during this time, the United States commander asked if we would escort the United States ship Princeton out of a known sea minefield which had damaged the ship off Kuwait. We were not authorized at that time to cross north of the latitude where the ship was positioned. And I called Admiral Summers to explain the situation and that the ship Athabaskan was well prepared to proceed. As I understand it, he received a reply from the Prime Minister within hours to authorize the deployment, which was ultimately successful. In addition, during the war, we were authorized to proceed off Kuwait under burning oil well smoke to protect the United States hospital ship Mercy against missile attack. We experienced being within kilometers of an anti-ship missile attack on the British destroyer HMS Gloucester, and we were overflown by several Scuds fired in the vicinity of Admiral Summers' headquarters in Bahrain. We were always prepared to evacuate him and his staff if necessary. There's no doubt in my mind that we were in a war. 150 Americans and 37 British soldiers died in the war. Countless were injured, and a number of Canadians have suffered and still suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of being in the war with all the stresses that entails. As for whether it was defined as a war, several bodies declared it as such, including the United States, the United Nations, Google, Wikipedia, Encyclopedia Britannica, and even the Veterans Affairs Canada website has as its title, Gulf War 1990-91. The Canadian government issued the Gulf and Kuwait Medal for all those who participated in the war. This medal is authorized by the government as the third highest war medal in the Canadian honors system. The ships Athabaskan, Terra Nova, and Protector, as well as 423 Helicopter Anti-Submarine Squadron and 439 Tactical Fighter Squadron, were awarded battle honors by the government. Battle honors are awarded for combat in a war. The Canadian Armed Forces defined the Gulf War as a war. General John de Chastelain, as Chief of the Defense Staff at the time, wrote the introduction of the book I co-authored with Sharon Hobson on the Canadian naval operations during the war, entitled The Persian Excursion / The Canadian Navy in the Gulf War. His first line, and I quote him, "The Gulf War was the first time since the Second World War that a Canadian Joint Force headquarters commanded elements of Canada's sea, land, and air forces in a joint and combined combat operation." He finishes his introduction with, "Commodore Miller and Sharon Hobson have compiled an entertaining account of Canada's role in the Gulf War, which should be of interest to the military and civilian reader alike." Note he uses Gulf War. The official history, Operation Friction, references the Gulf War as a war in numerous pages, including the jacket, which states, "The crisis in the Persian Gulf in 1990-91 saw Canada's armed forces sent off for war for the first time since the intervention in Korea." The recognition being sought from the Canadian government has been spearheaded by a master corporal who's the president of the association and a warrant officer representing the vice presidents. All of the sailors, they represent all of the sailors, airmen and women, and Army personnel who participated in the Gulf War. I fully support them. A coalition of the willing went to war to expel Iraqis from Kuwait, and a war ensued. There can be no doubt of this in this committee, and that veterans of the Gulf War 1991 are indeed war veterans. In closing, I'd like to pass on former Member of Parliament Peter Stauffer's advice to me when coming before this committee. By the way, he informed me he founded the first AVAC. He wanted me to remind you it took 50 years for the government to recognize merchant naval veterans from World War II as war veterans, and a similar delay for Korean War veterans. As it's only been 34 years since the Gulf War, his hope was that you wouldn't take another 16 years to do the right thing and recognize Gulf War veterans as war veterans. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. And also thank you, guys, for your service and for your courage also during those battles. And now we're going to start the first round of questions, 6 minutes each. And I invite Mr. Fraser Tormey to start the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a brief thank you to my fellow colleagues. I was away 2 weeks ago and received
Yeah.
some very nice messages from everybody with the loss in our family, and I have passed those on to my family, and so I want to say thank you and recognize that the outreach and outpouring of love. To our guests, our witnesses, I'd like to say thank you very much for your service, and I'm very, very grateful to have your perspective here with respects to what has happened and the challenges that we're facing with wartime recognition of service. So, Rear Admiral Summers, I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to follow up with a bit of a statement. Would you say we are allowing other governing bodies to dictate what we as a nation should be recognizing as wartime service? And why I ask that is you talked about the United Nations and about resolutions. And we as a nation adhere to a lot of international bodies with regards to what is war and what the rules of war are and engagements. And so I know that Canada is very, very sensitive to that because of the way we want to be seen in the world. Would you say that that is something that is impacting the decision being made with regards to recognizing the Persian Gulf as wartime service for our vets?
Thank you for the question. I hope I can answer it. War has changed, I guess. This is now a long ways. Well, if you think of First World War, Second World War, and the Korean War, those were more classic wars that we have grown up and known. Once the 1960s going, and Lester Pearson was the man that really got it going, peacekeeping became the modus operandi, how you resolve conflicts. And that went so far, and that held true all the way up until, I guess, the Gulf War. And that's when something happened there that it really went beyond. You couldn't do the resolutions; didn't work. You had to had the umph behind it, and that's recognized in the charter of the United Nations Charter. So when they turned around and the enforcement could not take place, then you had to the resolution would not be affected. They had to, in fact, use particular force. So I think it's all changed. And today, if you look at what's happening in the world, I think you'd find the same thing. So I guess the United Nations, in many ways, in the Western world, they can set the tone, the scene, through their actions and discussions at the United Nations. But it still comes down to the nations themselves and the final analysis to back it up. It was a coalition of the willing at the time that came together. And it was really, there was not really command and control as we know it in the military. It was nothing more than coordination and cooperation, and that's how we did things. We talked to all the other commanders and didn't ask any nation to do more than their government had authorized them to do. But between doing that, we're able to actually mesh together a pretty damn good plan.
Well, and that leads to my next question, because during your opening statement, you mentioned about asking Veterans Affairs to be able to change this. Are you aware that the Minister of National Defense can do this without our committee and without a vote within the House? And if so, what do you think the holdup is?
That's a loaded question, isn't it?
That's why you face gunfire. You've already talked about Scud missiles.
haven't talked to the parliamentarians recently, or at least the ones in the House. I know there's a certain the Senate rightly can look at things and then make some judgments and pass on your observations, and that goes to the House as well. But eventually the House has to do something about it. The ministers have to do something about it. So I would hope that what will come out of this committee is a recognition that this was a war and this was wartime service, and that message is passed over to the minister and the House, and they take appropriate action to, in fact, rectify what maybe has been a misservice.
Well, and the organization that, the gentlemen that have been and people that have served have been coming and advocating since 2017. So, this is something that's, coming up to, almost 10 years in the making. And so, I think that there is a very simple solution to what seems to be a convoluted, situation. What we see and what we recognize as war, from your perspective, doesn't seem to be lining up, and its policy not matching what our priority should be as a committee to recognize the service that you've gone through. I just have a couple more minutes, and I find you very, very engaging, you know, being an ex-Air Force guy and an ex, you know, yeah, yeah, we do. But I do thank you for recognizing the service of all services that were involved. What do you see as the differences between what's gone on in Korea and you know, they being recognized, and what's gone on with the Gulf War?
Well, my dad went to the Korean War. I got 1 minute, have I? My dad went to the Korean War, and that again was something. The ships went over there, and they went after a UN resolution, not unlike what we did. I don't know why that was seen as a war, quite honestly. And what we did in replying to a UN resolution is not seen as a war. That does not make sense to me. I think they're one and the same. I think it's just a question of, again, I go back to what I said initially, where there are classic wars, you want to call it that, and that's what it was, infantry against infantry and all that sort of stuff. So Second World War, First World War, Korean War, and what we're doing now, which is far more technology-oriented. I mean, all they have to do is look at what's happening in the Ukraine and Russia. They're not sending soldiers back and forth quite so much. They're sending drones. Technology is taken over. So it is a different warfare now that's going on.
Thank you, Mr. Tolmie. And now let's go to Mr. Sean Casey for 6 minutes, please. Mr. Casey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start with Vice Admiral Miller. Vice Admiral Miller, I also had the honor of serving with your friend Peter Stauffer. There weren't many people that would completely fill out the profile as a gentleman and a character around this place as Peter Stauffer, and I know my friend Charlie Angus will probably attest to that. Actually served with him on this committee in 2011 and 2012, and his story of being the founder of the Veterans Affairs Committee, I would say, is probably not far off. So good on you for seeking advice from him for coming here. I've got a great deal of respect for Peter Stauffer. On the Veterans Affairs website, there's a piece there about you, and one of the things you said in that piece was that the Gulf War was probably the most successful naval air deployment in Canada's history. Can you expand a little bit on that, please?
Well, thank you. Yes. We went to the war as a task group, a Canadian task group. And as Admiral Summers said, the interdiction was entirely successful with 5% of the ships there. We did 25% with the aircraft. The Sea King aircraft would challenge merchant ships. We boarded the merchant ships. And then we moved into the Central Gulf area, where we were asked to coordinate the logistic effort and the protection of the 4 United States aircraft carriers. My job was to assign the anti-air warfare escorts for those carriers. My job also was to assign escorts for all the shipping that came through the Strait of Hormuz, and to stop those that were sending ammunition to Iraq. And our job to pull out the USS Princeton from a minefield, which had lost its fantail almost, and there were injuries. We took that ship out of the minefield, and if you can imagine a ship being totally silent for 48 hours with the crew wearing socks and wondering if we were going to hit a mine, knowing that we had the best anti-mine sonar, we had the helicopter going overhead, and we had a tug behind us that actually eventually was secured to the USS Princeton, and we towed she told the Princeton down to, we had to go to Bahrain because we couldn't get to Dubai because the ship was damaged so heavily. And then when we went off Kuwait City, again through minefields and to protect the hospital ship from missiles, that all happened. And I can tell you there's a sense of satisfaction of this naval operation with many facets to it, with live ammunition, and watching on CNN every day the Tomahawk missiles going into Baghdad that were fired from the cruisers and the U.S. ships in the Gulf. It was indeed a war. And we were there. We were right under in the whole thing, right underneath it all and working it. And then part of my job was to ensure that all of the ships there were refueled and re-ammunitioned. And we set up a grid system with the names of the provinces of Canada on one side and 1 to 12 on the other side. So every ship that came into Manitoba 3 would know they were being controlled by a Canadian group. And as Admiral Summers said, what else are you going to do during the war? You know, you've got a task group personnel there that can organize all of this. So having painted that picture, that was, I think, the most successful naval operations and naval air operations. You know, the CF-18s provided cover for us. Sometimes they asked to strafe us.
Thank you, sir.
It was remarkable.
Thank you. I'm really sorry to cut you off. I only have 1 minute left, and I wanted to get a question in for Rear Admiral Summers.
Yeah.
Sir, did the Gulf War lead to any significant changes in Canadian military policy or Veterans Affairs, given the view you had of all aspects of it? I wonder if you could tell me if there was an impact, a lasting impact, and whether you could identify it. Thank you.
I guess the bottom line, sir, is I don't know what was done, if there was any changes. It all happened, and we all came back home, thankfully, and got on with our lives. I'm not aware, perhaps I should be aware, of whether there's any changes made to the Veterans Affairs, how they did that. All I know is that today we're sitting in a situation where I can't understand why it was not done, as opposed to what was actually done. I've got to go back to one quick point, if I may, and I'm taking up your time, sir. But I went to the American Admiral on the carriers there, and we had our squadron commander, squadron of Dusty and his team out there. And when I talked to the American commander, he says, I've got one thing I can't get my hands around is how we're going to keep all these guys supplied, rearmed, re-provisioned, and fueled. And I said, well, I've got a staff that's been doing this for a while and knows all the players here. Why don't we let me give him the responsibility? And the answer came back, yes, okay. And Dusty was the only non-U.S. commander in the Gulf during the Gulf War. And that, to me, I think, says testimony to the professionalism and the capability of our people. Sorry, that was beyond your question, but...
Thank you.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Et maintenant, nous allons passer la parole.
And now we will give the floor to Mr. Luc Desilets for the next 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour à tous.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, colleagues. And thank you to both our witnesses for being with us, and thank you for your service. Mr. Summers, I have questions for you. At what time would a government create a war cabinet?
When did they? It was shortly thereafter they formed this war cabinet. And the cabinet, this has been done before in the Korean War, I'm sure. But in this case here, because there were so many aspects involved, it's an all-government affair when you do that. Think about it. All the ministers do have a role to play. But by doing that, it also brings the decision makers, the key decision makers together. And so that when an issue comes up, in the case here, it could have been on going for the sweep and escort or going to above the certain line in the Gulf, we were able to, in fact, best example would have been the sweep and escort. I'm sure you don't know what a sweep and escort is. Neither did the members of the War Cabinet at the time. So when I saw this happening or going to happen, I talked to the people in Ottawa. They went to the War Cabinet and said, gentlemen, it's potentially that they're going to ask us to be able to do sweep and escort. Here's what sweep is. Here's what escort is. They explained it. And what happened in that was after doing that, they understood it, and they gave permission or gave delegate authority to the Chief of Defense Staff saying, when in fact they ask for that, we understand what you're talking about. You have the authority to tell him he can do it.
J'entends très bien ce que vous dites, mais
I hear you, but when should it be created? Is it when we think that Canada might be at war or when we expect to be called to war? Thank you for the question. It's after the war begins.
Je pense que quelques jours.
I think that it was a few days after January 15th or 16th. I'm not sure exactly. Your French is excellent. What do you feel, or what do you think about what the Deputy Minister said a few weeks ago about the Gulf War being a war, but Canada was not at war?
Oh, I wish I could speak in English. Okay.
Oh.
But, that was an interesting, and you go back to the debates that were going on, it was quite clear. As I said, on the 15th, they were still debating in Parliament whether we should even be in the Gulf. And in fact, some of the parties, a party in particular, was opposed to being in the Gulf, point blank. But, you know, they had to grapple with that question, and it was a fait accompli. Again, being a member of the United Nations and having been very vocal and strong in establishing the resolutions, part of that, if the resolution is not abided by, there is a implicit requirement to, in fact, be able to enforce the resolution by force.
pour vous, est-ce que le Canada est en guerre?
Do you believe that Canada was at war?
Mais oui. Bien sûr.
Yes, certainly, without question. Thank you very much. How would you explain that almost all of the witnesses here have the same interpretation as you, that Canada was at war and that it had impact? Do you believe that it's only a financial impact? Is that why the Canadian government refuses to recognize the fact that it was a war? Answer: I don't know why the government is not recognizing that. That it was a war, not a conflict or something like that. I'm not sure.
Or a senator, maybe I could do something about it.
Et selon vous, la seule façon...
And the only way to get out of that, would that be for Parliament to adopt legislation?
Vous avez
You can look at the situation, but it is the House of Commons that makes legislation.
affairs pour recognize that, in fact, it was a wartime service.
Comment réagissez-vous au fait
Service members who received a Gulf medal are not authorized to wear it? How do you feel about that? Can you repeat the question? Gulf War veterans who received a medal cannot wear it on their military apparel. That is a great question, sir.
Me.
Yeah. Oui.
When the question came up, and everyone was very, very proud that we had served in the Gulf, and we're very pleased that we were given medals by the Saudi Arabian government and other governments to wear. And I often thought, well, you know, it's a piece of metal which you put on your chest, And if I was a Gulf War veteran, I pictured a grandchild on your knee and say, Papa, what is that? And you could say, well, I was in the Gare. It didn't cost very much. But in fact, the reason why we were only given one medal was because the Canadian government at the time, or National Defence, had decreed that, in fact, the Canadian government have given you a medal. Therefore, that's for your service in the Gulf. What was being given to you by Saudi Arabia or Bahrain or other place, that doesn't, you can't wear that one. You can only wear the one that Canada gave you.
Thank you.
Don't agree with
Merci.
that? But that was
Thank
the-
you.
Merci, M. Sommer.
Merci, Monsieur Desilets.
Thank you, Mr. Summer. Thank you, Mr. Desilets.
MP Charlie Angus for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and what a pleasure to be at this committee, and I want to thank you, gentlemen, for your service to our country. I come from Northern Ontario, home of the Algonquin Regiment, and many of our young people through the years have gone, Royal Canadian Regiment, Princess Pat's, the Vandeus, lots to the Vandeus, Navy, Air Force. And there's an understanding that some may be in combat, some may not. But the understanding is that when they sign up, if there's a war, they and their families know that they're going to go and put their lives on the line. That's the contract. And so the contract with Canada has to be, once you signed up, we will be there for you when you come home. Do you feel that Canada has lived up to its part of the contract, Admiral Summers?
I think in many ways it has, in terms of providing benefits and looking after the families. Certainly when we were over there, there was a great care given by our own military and the government, quite honestly, to recognizing there was implications with the families. And I think in terms of recognition, it's there. I guess what has failed to happen is the legislation to follow through, which in some cases, for those people that the thing called the Gulf War Syndrome came up there during the Gulf. We didn't know what the heck it was, but it morphed into PTSD, which we all know about now. People had in the Gulf War Syndrome, they had PTSD. We just didn't know it and recognize it. I think the obligation now on behalf of the government is that fact that those type of ramifications of being in war need to be looked at and supported by the government.
I thank you for that response. Certainly, I'm very proud of the Veterans Affairs workers in Kirkland Lake in my region, and I have had the honor to travel for commemorations in Sicily, Italy, Normandy, and I've been told by many Europeans about how special it is the way Canada commemorates, even compared to our allies. But I want to ask you an extension on the question on the Gulf War Syndrome. When I was elected, one of the first things I faced was that we were sending Canadians, what was called Operation Enduring Freedom. We were sending Canadians into Kandahar, and nobody called that special duty. We knew they were going to war. And I realized then that was the most important decision I might make in my career, is that sending people to face death or serious injury. That was also the time when they changed the veterans, from the pension to the lump sum payment. And I remember thinking then, and I was much younger, that, when you come back, maybe a lump sum doesn't seem so bad, but the effects start to happen as you get older. And it's certainly, in my office, I've dealt with many, many frontline and veterans who, through the years, it started long after it started to affect them, and this is where we needed to be. So could you talk to us about what you saw with Gulf War Syndrome, and what we've seen in terms of our understanding of PTSD, and why we need to frame the support and pension for the whole of life approach?
Again, an excellent point you make. Yes, and in fact, I was in Afghanistan a number of times, and I met some of the soldiers over there that got involved. And I remember one that had his face all cut up because he'd got a bomb had gone off near him. And yes, I know it's for a young soldier, sailor, or airman, lump sum payment is very attractive. They can go out and buy a car, they can go out and buy a home or something like that. But you hit the correct. It's the long-term ramifications. They need to have that long-term pension if they, in fact, suffer those type of injuries. So I think that's the key. We should be looking at that again.
Well, we've heard some excellent testimony on that. Sean Bria.
Sean Bria, yeah.
Yeah, he had said, when we compare the benefits that all veterans had from basically World War I right up to 2006, they were covered under the Pension Act. Prior to that, there were other lifelong pensions in place. He says the important thing is for the committee that cares about families, spouses, and children and families. They were always compensated separately under the Pension Act, and that changed in 2006. And since then, it hasn't improved. There are no extra monies for a married person or a person with dependents or a person with children. I think in order to harmonize the benefits, and we know what the cost will be, Parliament might not be happy about approving of that, but it would be an easy fix if we ignore the money part. And what we have to do is replace the pain and suffering compensation under the Veterans Wellbeing Act with the Pension Act. And there, it's done. That's his testimony. How do you see that?
D'accord.
D'accord? Okay. I was expecting you to give me a much harder and more complex answer, but it seems so simple, does it not?
5 minutes, I go on and on. Okay.
Okay. I think I just want to follow up on that because, again, I've seen it in my political career of people who've come into my office who had extraordinary backgrounds, served us in dangerous theaters, served in all manner, and then came home, and then things began to fall apart. And Veterans Affairs was there, but for the family, the question is that they were also in combat where it wasn't recognized that they were in combat. They were against special duty. They were on policing missions. How important is it, the recognition that they were in combat, that this, like for Persian Gulf, the recognition of that separate from all the other supports that we need to put in place?
I think it's important, certainly to the people that served and also to the families. I can recall, and Dusty would agree with this, we had a situation where a media person was on one of the ships, and not much was going on in the interdiction. We were just doing our thing on the Gulf, the interdiction, and he was bored, so he talked to a young sailor on the wing, and the guy says, I'm kind of lonely, I want to go home. And so this thing blew up in the Globe and Mail, I think it was, if I recall correctly. And anyways, it got people really upset. And the families back home heard this and said, hey, they all want to come home. What's going on here? And it became a big hoofah in Halifax. And it took quite a bit of work by the Admiral down there and the staff to actually say, hey, this is not the case. And we had to send messages back to our families saying, look, that was one sailor, and he was lonely, and he wanted to get back and talk to his family. They were doing an awful lot for us. And so I think, it comes on the families. They feel, I know my own family, they were well aware where I was, what I was doing, and they had their fears. My daughter, my young son, very much so. And they wanted Dad to be home, type thing. It's a hard thing. You're there. The anxiety is there. I think in many ways, and maybe Dusty would agree with this, because we were there and we knew what was going on, we could understand what was happening. But they don't know that back in Halifax. They don't know that back in Valcartier or places like that. And so we may have been more comfortable. The families were not very much, they weren't at ease. Let's put it that way. So the families are very much a part of it. And one of the good things we did, and we had good communication. So if Mom was having trouble with Johnny, Mom could get on the phone and talk to her husband. And the husband could then get on the phone to Johnny, come on, get your act together, do what your mother says. That type of communications we were able to establish during the Gulf, which we had never done in operations before. So there are things we have done, and that was in Marsat, I guess, Dusty, and we were able to do that type of thing. But it certainly gave a lot of comfort to the families when things went awry.
Thank you, Mr. Summers. So now let's start the second round of questions till 4:45. So I'm going to start with Mrs. Wagenthal for 5 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you both for your service and for sharing with us today. Very vital to understanding a lot of the dynamics that we wouldn't understand as civilians and not family members. So I just want to take note of some things that you said, Mr. Summers. You talked about we need to make the peace to keep the peace. And then talked about you went in to expel Iraqis and you faced hostility daily. So was this originally considered a peacekeeping tour? Or did they just not name it till,
Well, when we
that's fine. Go ahead, yes.
Thank you. When we left, we weren't really sure what we were getting ourselves into, quite honestly. The government had been talking with the UN. Our Prime Minister had been talking with the President of the United States and other leaders. And so we left, and there was a UN resolution, and the resolution was that Saddam Hussein had to take the Iraqis out of Kuwait. As it went on, and then we did the embargo and tried to put emphasis behind that to make him economically say, okay, I better get out. He didn't. So that's what happened there. So it was a peacekeeping, it was a resolution that did not involve hostilities as we went over there. We were prepared for hostilities, and we trained for hostilities, both the Navy and the Air Force. When we got there, we weren't. But now, when the time came, you had to be able to do it. So that's when it went from a UN resolution to a conflict
So in
war.
reality, though,
Sorry?
I did hear from other witnesses who said, we were told we're going over there, we're not sure, but you might not come back. So that's pretty broad. That sounds a lot like potential to be in a war, and it was called a war. But what we hear now is there's this confusion on the ground in Ottawa in regard to what definitions are, because we did have testimony from VAC's Assistant Deputy Minister for commemoration saying that the Persian Gulf War is not defined as a war. And then she clarified that's their perspective because Canada itself was not at war. I'm sure that must drive you as crazy as it does some of these other folks who have experienced what you experienced. So what would you have had to have experienced for it to not be a war?
Would
Is
not
that
be a
too
war?
convoluted?
Sorry?
Yeah. Well, what made it a war? Let's go that direction. In
What
your
made it a
hearts and
war?
minds as serving members.
I suppose it's a resolution was passed, a deadline was passed, and it was very clear. And in fact, the Iraqis still maintained control over Kuwait, and most of the Kuwaitis had left, and their money had left too. This type of thing here, and they were so that deadline was there, and it would be all too easy if Saddam Hussein had gone back, because clearly the world community had said, you can't do this, you shouldn't do this. Huh?
He didn't listen.
But he didn't. And so that comes back to what the Prime Minister said at the time. When you get involved in these resolutions, there is an implicit, I think it's Article 1, if I'm not mistaken, of the Charter, that you in fact have the member nations have the obligation, I guess, to enforce what the resolutions, if in fact they're not met.
Okay. When I hear how we served, I had the opportunity to be in France to celebrate Canada's 100 days. Everywhere Canada has gone, even in Syria when we were playing a part there, when we took our two Air Force, our jets back home, the U.S. went, whoa, wait a minute. Like, we are appreciated for what we do wherever we are. And what you did here was putting your lives on the line and working to serve Canadians. So how do we fix this? Because what I'm hearing from Veterans Affairs and the folks serving in D&D is that with the new Veterans Charter, the term war does not exist. It's not defined. It's now a different term. And we have, what are they called? Modern-day vets. Does that make sense to you? What is a modern-day veteran?
I have no idea what a modern-day vet is, other than it's someone that's probably gone into peacekeeping or war operations. I don't understand. The Veterans Affairs now, anyone that has served in the military is now deemed a veteran.
But there's different kinds of veterans, apparently,
Well,
that we need to clarify. I appreciate what you say. It's ridiculous that we have basically, I think, gotten caught by definitions and bureaucracy rather than thinking
Common sense.
most important, that's a good word, and caring for what our veterans have done. So do I have a little, oh,
Sorry. Thank you, Mrs. Morgenthau. And don't forget we have Mr. Miller on Zoom too. So for 5 minutes, I invite Mr. Surai to ask questions. Mr. Surai.
Thank you to both of you, Mr. Summers and Mr. Miller. And for that very reason, I'm going to ask Mr. Miller and give you a break for a few minutes. And I'm sure there'll be more questions to you. Mr. Miller, one of the dangerous situations that the Canadian contingent played a key role in occurred when the Athabascan ship went to the aid of the USS Princeton, an American ship that had been seriously damaged by Iraqi mines off the coast of Kuwait. Could you provide our committee with more first-hand kind of context of the situation, the role that Canada and Canadians played to support the coalition and our allies at that time?
Certainly. As I said in my opening comments, the U.S. commander called me up, and you'll probably appreciate this. He said the USS Princeton has been damaged off Kuwait in a mine, a known minefield. And he said, I need an escort for the tug to go up there and escort that ship out. He said, and the ship should have a helicopter, should have communications with all of us, should have anti-mine sonar systems. And he said, there's only one ship that meets all that criteria, and you're sailing in it. So I'm asking you, if you can get the authorization to be the ship that goes off Kuwait and rescues the USS Princeton. So that's when I called Admiral Summers and said, here's the deal. Athabascan is perfectly prepared to go north and to be off Kuwait and to rescue the USS Princeton. And in fact, we did. And we had to sail at a certain speed so we wouldn't activate any of the other types of mines that were in that area. There were mines, floating mines that the Iraqis had let go in the Persian Gulf. It was a pretty dangerous mission. And certainly the crew was, I talked to the captain. I said, it's up to you, Captain. You're the one who's going to put your ship in danger. And he said, no question, we're well prepared. We can do this. So that's what we did. I'd just like to add one thing about the fact that Canada did not declare war on Iraq. That's irrelevant to my mind. That there was a war going on and Canadians were in it. It may not have been declared by Canada, but we were in it. And when you look at the Webster Dictionary, it says if two factions with combat capability go at each other, a war is declared. You can look up all the definitions. There are legal definitions too. Every definition you can put the Gulf War in, and it comes out as a war. So there's no question. It was a war, and the whole Canadian public knew it as a war. So, and we went through dangerous things. I can't tell you how glad we were when we came back, and all of us came back. I think that's one of the other things. The most successful naval operation in our history is that we all came back alive.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I'm going to
every day.
Thank you. And I think Mr. Summers wants to add.
Just a quick interjection. No one ever declared war. No one ever declared a ceasefire, but a ceasefire occurred. And eventually, I think 45 days later, peace was declared, if you want to call it that. So that's the type of operation we're involved in. War was never declared. It all happened when he didn't do that. And 2 o'clock in the morning on the 16th, all hell broke loose. And that's what that broke. That's how we got back involved in it. And then eventually, at a point in time, a ceasefire was declared. They stopped fighting, but it was never declared. Saddam Hussein never declared ceasefire. They all stopped.
Maybe, Mr. Miller, if you can share with us, you had mentioned, I read something about you, that letters from across Canada, from schools and concerned citizens, and how the sailors responded to every one of them. If you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a great story. Just about every school across the country wrote letters to the ships, and we would have a big bucket outside the sick bay with the letters in it, and we encouraged every sailor to pick one and write back. And that's what they did. It was remarkable. And I know that my son was at university, and he said, "Dad, they have a stress room for us because everybody's watching those missiles go into Baghdad, and the capability to fire one into the third story and the third window of the Iraqi headquarters was what was happening, and people were stressed by that. So the right across the country, high schools, elementary schools, they wrote to the sailors. So we had this system aboard every ship to share all these. There were thousands of letters. We responded to every single one. I must have written about 10 or 15 myself by going by the sick bay and picking out a letter and writing back and saying, yeah, war is not fun, and it's terrible. And you should be thankful that you're lucky in your lovely city where there aren't tanks rolling in to destroy your houses, because that's what happened in Kuwait when the Iraqis invaded and they started a war. No question, it's a war.
Thank you so much. We have two other interventions of 2 minutes and a half each. So I start with Mr. Luc Desilets for 2 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je demanderai aux témoins de...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to ask the witnesses for short answers because my time is quite limited. Mr. Miller, did Canada have a choice in participating in this war or this not war?
And you said, I don't have translation here, but I understand you are asking whether the Canadian government accepts it as a war or not as a war. You know, if you're telling me that the Minister of National Defense can declare that it was a war, I'm going to call him up, believe me, and say, hey, Minister, declare it as a war. No question. Should be a war.
Qu'est-ce que vous répondriez à cette question? Est-ce que le...
What would you answer to this question? Did Canada have a choice in participating in the Gulf War?
It certainly has an obligation to all those who served in the Persian Gulf. An obligation. I think of young people today, we're wondering why they're not joining the military. Well, here's a perfect reason. That when we went to war and we come back and we don't get all the benefits that should be accrued by going into that war and being, shot at, what do you think a young person is going to do on social media today? They're not going to join the military, because when you join it and you get into trouble, your government isn't going to give you all the benefits that should be.
Merci. Merci. Peut-être une question pour... Si vous êtes...
Thank you. If you can respond briefly, Mr. Summers.
History of being involved and getting involved in things that are right. Dr. Pearson with the United Nations, we all ended up getting involved. So we want to do these things, and we see do what's right for the world, and we're proud of ourselves that we're a member of a community that takes these obligations on.
Selon vous, Monsieur Sommer, est-ce que le...
Mr. Summers, did Canada play a secondary role in that war? Or were they truly part of the conflict?
Role important.
They played an important role.
One that the Allies were very much wanting us to do. At the time, I would say that we looked to take on challenges with challenging roles, ones that we were fully capable of doing, and ones that in fact gave the highest visibility to Canada. That's why we ended up in the Middle Gulf, the Central Gulf. That's why the aircraft were taking on these missions of CAP and then close air sweep and escort missions. It was what was needed most by the Allied effort, and that's what we tried to meet if we were capable of doing it, and it was safe to do so.
Merci beaucoup, messieurs.
Thank you. Merci. So, Mr. Charlie Angus, you have the floor for 2 minutes and a half to close.
Well, thank you. Commemorations are really super important. They're at the center of every one of our little towns across Canada. In my town of Cobalt, they name 100 names that we lost in a town that doesn't have streetlights. And we remember. When you go to Ortona and go to the center of the community and see the beautiful statue of the Angel of Ortona, it reminds people of the sacrifice. I would like to ask both gentlemen, if we had 4,000 Canadians serve in the Persian Gulf, what would a commemoration that is fitting be that you would think we should have for the veterans?
I would think the most important thing, quite honestly, is not something that's in stone or a monument or something like that. I think it would be more fact that just a recognition that they had served and they had been serving in a wartime environment, because they would like that. Just the fact, recognition that this is what had taken place. Other things would follow. You know, the monuments. There's a peacekeeping monument here on Sussex. Sussex. And there's all throughout the country there are. Maybe there should be the Persian Gulf War or on there as well. It wasn't just things that changed, as I mentioned. What was World War I, World War II, and the Korean War, they're not the same anymore. We don't have those anymore. What we have is drones flying in, this type of thing here. So it's changed.
Miller, what would you say?
I agree with Admiral Summers. I don't think we need any monument, but the recognition is very much important. I can't understand why they can't be called war veterans. I mean, you got to be kidding me. And no, we don't need a statue or anything. The fact that we all came back alive is probably testament enough to the fact that we were clever. I can tell you, we had help from our allies when we went over there. The French provided a simulation of the Exocet missile, which the Iraqis could fire at us, and they sent aircraft every day towards us. If we saw a missile launch, we would fire back. They provided that so that we would know the best aspect to put the ships when we thought an attack was coming, and we sailed that way. And that's one of the reasons we all came back, I can tell you, because there were missiles flying around, and we were lucky. What kind of recognition? I think anniversaries are important. I went to the 50th or the 25th anniversary of the Swiss Air disaster. I was the commander of the search and rescue and recovery of Swiss Air. And I think to remember with the proper commemorative ceremony is extremely important. We did have one for the 30th year of the Persian Gulf War. It was held in Halifax, and in fact, Athabascans sailed by the jetty with, I would say, thousands of Haligonians on the jetty. And when we left for the unknown, tens of thousands were lining the jetties to wave us goodbye because they didn't know we were coming back.
Thank you very much. And that's the end of the first panel. And I'd like to thank you. And à titre personnel,
We had, as an individual with us, Vice Admiral retired, Mr. Duncan Miller, by video conference. And we had Rear Admiral Ken Summers, also retired, Commander of the Canadian Forces in the Middle East. Again,
testimony, and je suspends à l'instant.
we are now suspended.
Nous reprenons la séance. So
We are resuming.
we have with us as an individual Master Corporal retired John Senior. You are here with us, and you're going to have 5 minutes for your opening statement, and after that, you are in the room. Members of the committee will ask you some questions. So the floor is yours, Mr.
I remember last time I was here, I had 5 minutes and don't talk too fast. So last time I definitely talked way too fast. So in regards to this meeting today, quite briefly, I signed up in 1990. I did my training in Germany in the Armored Corps, or went to the Armored Corps, and was part of the Cold War. I understood what the Cold War was. I understood what the Cold War was. And so what I didn't realize at the time, and after hearing today's testimonials and discussions and stuff, was that if I got hurt at that time, I wouldn't have got the same benefits as a World War II veteran or a Korean veteran or First World War veteran. I didn't know that. So I guess what happened is I joined the military under false pretenses. I was ready to give all because I signed the dotted line. What I didn't realize was that within the fine print, the Canadian Armed Forces / Government of Canada was not prepared to cover me the same as a World War II veteran. I think it's a tragedy. And then being called to do this meeting here for the Gulf War veterans, we knew that they got shortchanged because I was in Germany at the time under the Cold War, serving, ready to die if I had to. And we were told quite clearly at that point in time, you as a tank gunner have to take out 36 Russian tanks before you die. We had to be at a 75% minimum manning at all times. We knew that if anything happened, that Red Horde would come on over the hill towards the Rhine River, and we were to slow them down. Again, we signed the dotted line. We knew what we were up against. We did not realize, in retrospect now, I'm sitting here listening, going like, oh, a World War II vet doing the same sort of thing gets a whole lot more coverage and respect because they're a war vet. I went to Afghanistan, and I knew what was the chance of what was going on there, and I knew it was a war. I look at this, and this combat star tells me I was in a war. But why is it I'm finding out now, after I got home in 2010, and it is now 2024, I'm not really truly considered a war vet by the Canadian government for coverage. How can you, as members of Parliament, Government of Canada, try to recruit from your particular population of people and say, hey, there's this little line at the bottom of the contract that says ultimate liability. What that means is if we need you to go to war for us or fight for us or represent us, that you are willing to give up your life for your country. Fine print below that is, if you manage to survive and come back to Canada, you're only going to get 20% or 34% or 45% what a real war vet back in World War II did. Wind the clock back, I'm in Afghanistan with the Air Force on X-ray ramp with the helicopters. And what we did was we went over there with our Chinooks, our 6 Chinooks that we purchased from the Americans. And we rotated our troops out. Do you think those troops came back any dirtier or any cleaner because they weren't recognized as war vets? I guarantee you that you could take any one of those pictures of real life that I was looking at and make it a black and white photo, and it would look just the same in harshness on their faces from World War II or Korea or World War I. Those war vets, those Gulf War vets that everyone else is recognizing except the benefits and services, those particular people have a really hard time because they are forgotten vets. The Government of Canada, in certain places, can easily say As long as there's no tie to benefits, you're a Gulf War veteran. So what does being a war veteran really mean to me or to them? Being a war veteran, it's a completion of mission. I'm not a modern vet. I know I'm not a modern vet. It says I'm not a modern vet. I fought in a freaking war. I was willing at that time that if anything happened, I had to prepare my family for the fact that I might be one of those 158 people that come back in a box with a flag. And now all of a sudden I'm sitting here an hour later, just an hour ago, finding out that I don't have the same coverage. Forgive me for being a little bit warm under the collar, perspiring. I'm a little angry. I feel betrayed. It's up to you to fix it. That's my speech.
Thank you very much, Mr. Senior, and thank you for your service, also courage. And now we're going to start the first round of questions, and I'm pleased to invite Mr. Blake Richards for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. And you just made the statement, it's up to you to fix it. It's up to the Minister of National Defense. That's who it's up to. And I guess, the last time you were before this committee, you raised some concerns about the lack of respect that Canadian veterans have had, and just in basic things like recognizing and commemorating service. And I guess the fact that they can't even get those kinds of things right. What sort of confidence do you have in the Minister of Defense and in this current government to actually address this issue for veterans like yourself that served in Afghanistan, veterans that served in the Persian Gulf and others? What sort of confidence do you have that they'll actually get this and fix this?
To be quite honest, right now, there's I think the lack in the government at this point in time for veterans is at an all-time low. End of story with that. It is at an all-time low. I think that when this particular thing here goes mainstream, I think there's going to be a lot of more upset veterans that want to get things fixed, and I think that currently there's a deficit of street credibility of the government towards veterans, because we've been taking a hit for quite a few years, to be quite honest, ever since the new Veterans Charters kicked in, and then we call it a pizza pension for a reason, because they'll take a lump sum, they'll divide it up and give it to us. You get $36 a month, and then this improvement came along afterwards, because ever since that famous saying, if you're asking more than we can give, I'm sorry, it's actually the other way around. The government of Canada is asking more than the veterans are now willing to give, and therefore you guys are at a deficit as a government. And it's no wonder there's a recruiting problem. It's no wonder there's a retention problem. And it's because of that lack of trust from the person going into the Canadian Armed Forces and learning about these deficits. Does that answer your question, sir?
I think it does. I know that you engage with your fellow veterans on social media quite. You're quite active there. You've got a pretty big following, I believe, on social media as well. Can you tell us how many veterans your online community reaches?
I do have the ability to reach 18,000 veterans.
18,000 veterans. So that's a pretty significant number of our veterans in this country. And what would you say the general consensus is, with those veterans, in terms of their confidence in this government to be able to properly care for our veterans and to be able to maintain a capable military?
Again, there's a drastic lack of confidence, and that's why on social media there are so many startup local groups that take care of our own. Because if the government can't do it, Veterans Affairs can't do it through the bureaucracy and stonewalling and denied till death kind of policy is what we look at and we call it. And the pizza pension earned that name because you cannot buy a pizza once a month with that less than $36 that you get for missing a leg. Okay, so we have to take care of ourselves because it's not happening at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's and you use the word can't. I would use the word won't. I think that they won't do it right. They won't get it right is more accurate. They could. They won't. But I'd like to ask you on another matter. We had the commander of military personnel here last year at this committee, and we asked about how many people leave the Canadian Forces each year, and where that was tracked. And they told us that they didn't actually have those numbers and they didn't track them. Do you believe that?
They have the numbers. They don't want to disclose them because it shows a deficit. And just in the last 6 months, I put 2 more people back into the Canadian Armed Forces and as recruiting. And a lot of us as veterans are discounted for the lack of, people figure that we get out and that's it. The reality is we are still loyal to the Canadian Armed Forces. We're still loyal to the military and reputation. And we do put back in a lot more than we get back out. And I think that if the numbers actually did come on out of how many are leaving or thinking of leaving or are just barely hanging on but are not serviceable, it would be a scary number for the average person to have to listen to.
And I think you're right on that one. And that's, I hear it every day, veterans like yourself that say, I wouldn't recommend it to others. I wouldn't recommend it to my own children. I've heard that many times. We also had the Minister of Veterans Affairs here, and she told us that they actually don't know how many homeless veterans there are out there. And I guess I just really struggle to how the heck can you not know how many people are leaving? How can you not know how many homeless veterans you got out there? And I guess I would ask you this: how do you think that your fellow veterans and yourself would feel when about the possibility of getting your well-documented service recognized as wartime service when we have a government that can't even be bothered to help veterans who are relying on food banks or homeless shelters just to get by? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
It's an embarrassment. And it's not going to come forward anytime soon because being able to track what we call what is a true homeless veteran, because picturing a veteran on the street doesn't really happen. We are too well connected, and we couch surf as homeless. We are homeless. There's homeless out there that they just don't have a house under their heads, but they are not going hungry because of the food banks, because of people are sliding money out of their doors, because people are keeping their cars running. The community is taking care of itself because of the failure.
And I'm glad that there is those people out there to do that, but it shouldn't have to be the case.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to invite Mr. Wilson Miao for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for joining us again, Mr. Senior. It's great to have you back here. What is in your opinion, the difference between the terminology war service and special duty service? Because you mentioned in your remark how you're surprised after hearing all these testimony and knowing the difference in the benefit that you'll be getting.
Okay, I can answer that with a question, sir, are you a member of Parliament or an advocate? A member of Parliament gets benefits. An advocate doesn't. You get paid by the hour. So being a war veteran, it was earned. You were there. You made that sacrifice. You had to prepare your family. You have to prepare. And when you finish and you come back, it closes that mission. People are programmed in the military to complete missions. We do things. He gives a task, we complete it. So if I was tasked to do a peacekeeping mission and come back, I'm a peacekeeper. I got that and I got the medal, right? But completing a mission and saying, well, it was a conflict. We're going to work on technicalities here, so it's not really a war. But to me, as a frontline troop, not talking with commanders or admirals, but a frontline soldier, I'm a war vet. And again, everyone else can recognize that. But why can't my own government recognize that? It's institutional betrayal. So calling it something that just to wordsmith it so it sounds better for political reasons really shortchanges a soldier, and it runs at your credibility as a government. And I do say yours as all because I'm a master corporal. I do not have the ability to make that change. okay? And there are thousands of retired people that cannot make that change. So we take our orders from the Government of Canada. So that's for you to figure out how to get it fixed, not me.
Thank you for sharing that. And let's talk about the value and importance of local commemorations. The role of these initiatives can play in helping better integrate and support our veterans during the transition to civilian life, which you have a strong portfolio on this. Would you say that the Department of Veterans Affairs should invest less on commemoration or about the same as it does now, or increase more funding towards commemoration?
Commemoration drives recruiting. Commemoration drives morale. Commemoration drives everything for the Canadian Armed Forces. You look at other nations that invest more into commemoration rather than spending the money somewhere else on feel-good projects. Okay? Without your soldiers, you don't have sovereignty. Without your soldiers, you don't have a military. Without your soldiers willing to lay down their lives, you're not going to be able to complete your missions. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yeah. And do you think learning materials that are currently available from VAC helps Canadians to develop a better appreciation of the service and sacrifice made by CAV and veterans? And would you support the department in expanding these efforts?
I would say that they're at best right now they're doing the job at a bare minimum level. I do subscribe to the teachers portion of the Veterans Affairs commemoration portfolio, and I do give out the material, and it is a bit lacking. It needs to be updated, and it could do a whole lot more. And again, it really does need to focus on the war veterans as well, because it's right now it uses soft language like conflict or interventions and other soft word things. You need to call things what they truly are. If it's a war, it's a war. If it's a peacekeeping mission, it's a peacekeeping mission. Okay? We can't water it down because it might hurt someone's feelings. Okay? We're giving guns, and we have to make really big decisions in other people's lives. And as a commander here, as you saw beforehand, made really, really big decisions. So we have to really call it what it is.
And would changing this termination be better recognized for veterans and the operation that they serve on between the wartime service and the special duty service?
100% it would. Again, it would drive the recruiting, right? It's like people, you're appealing to a very different audience nowadays. This audience that you're dealing with nowadays to appeal to come into the military, they will have two or three or more careers in a lifetime. When I first got in, it was a single career choice. Okay, I got in the military. I was going to do it until the day I died. I was going to do it until. Nowadays, it's one of your life experiences. So in order to do and make the changes, you need to really update that whole portfolio and keep it attractive.
And if there's any recommendation you would like to share and put forward to support the increase of recruitment to CAV, what would that be?
I think stop working on the technicalities. Like this whole thing here right now, I'm still fuming. I'm sorry under the caller right now about not, the war veteran stuff like this and the benefits differences. I think that it's. Sorry, what's the question again? I'm like, I lost track because of my anger.
So any recommendation?
Yes, the recommendations. Yes. Sure. Yeah, doing the recommendation would be for sure the recognition of the Cold War veterans and the commemorations. We don't need any more massive statues. Those are nice, and having a place to go was really, really nice. The names on the walls are good and that kind of stuff. But yeah, actual commemorations and recognition of those days.
Thank you, Mr. Miao. Et maintenant, je passe donc la parole à Monsieur.
I will now give the floor to Mr. Luc Desilets for the next 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Senior, if you had known the difference between the benefits before enrolling, are you not hearing interpretation? I believe that the witness is not receiving interpretation.
On vous envoie quelqu'un.
Minute. Voilà. Et là, si je...
And now, if I speak French, are you hearing the interpreter? You're still not hearing the English interpretation?
OK. Voilà, je continue à parler.
I will continue speaking French until we can figure out whether or not you are hearing interpretation. I will continue speaking French. Hello, how are you?
Yeah. Voilà, on essaie avec le volume.
We're going to see after raising the volume whether or not you are hearing interpretation. This is the interpreter. Test, test, test. Are you hearing interpretation?
Parfait. À votre place, ça marche.
So now you can sit where you were sitting originally. It's working now. You can sit where you'd like. Can we simply move the nameplate, please, Madam Clerk? Thank you very much. Great. Mr. Desilets. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Sauvé. Mr. Desilets, I did stop your time. You were 12 seconds in anyway, but the floor is yours. Our new clerk is great. We are starting to see that. My question is as follows. Had you known that there were different benefits, do you think that you would have enrolled in the armed forces anyway?
Oh, you are good. Yes, I would have. I would have. I am fifth generation military. So regardless of the situation, I still would have joined. But I do think that it would have made a difference of my loyalty or commitment levels, for sure. As I said, in retrospect right now, I look back on my service and I feel a little bit of institutional betrayal, to be quite honest.
Parfait. Est-ce que vous avez l'impression que...
Do you have the impression that many others also felt betrayed? And do you think that this would have an impact on young people and whether or not they want to enroll? If most people knew what was going on, would that have an impact on enrollment?
That's a fair question. And to be honest, I think I partially answered that there with Mr. Wilson as well, which is that I think that people are going to be a lot less risk averse to going onto certain missions. They'll try to find a way out of the mission, or they'll be, oh, my wife is pregnant, I can't go now, or, hey, sorry, I just got a good job offer, I'm going to leave. And when those kinds of releases happen, it doesn't reflect the true reason why a person left the military, which is I am not willing to come back maimed for the rest of my life for the lack of commitment based on the government. So I'm going to keep my life safe. So I do think it does play a drastic role in the level of commitment of the soldier to the mission, for sure.
Donc, à vous entendre, vous avez l'impression...
And so, a leg that is... losing a leg in Korea versus in a different war, would you still be losing the same leg?
Je parle de monétairement.
Well, for me,
monetarily.
Leg that would got lost, yes, but it would. However, the money coming back, or the money from Veterans Affairs, or the services related to improve my life, or the quality of my life, would change drastically between NBC and pre-NB and New Veterans Charter and post-New Veterans Charter, for sure. And I can tell you that there were people that were in Afghanistan on one day were covered previous benefits, and the very next day his buddy got hurt and is not covered the same. And it creates quite the animosity between soldiers that fought in the same conflict.
Oui, la différence, je comprends, c'est...
I understand. That's unacceptable. Do you get the impression that benefits and the low rates of benefits could have a link with homelessness?
Oh, yeah. They're directly linked. They're one and the same. They're very, very linked. The rate of homelessness, so the money coming in per month or the services per month, again, feeling of abandonment drives up homelessness. Feeling of institutional betrayal increases homelessness because what did I do this for? Why did I? And so you get all these questions that are just regurgitated through your head on a regular basis, and it attacks your esteem, your soul, and that kind of stuff for sure. So they are linked.
Avez-vous l'occasion de calculer les sommes?
Have you calculated what the difference is between the benefits post-charter and pre-charter?
I don't want that headache. I don't want to know the disparity because I need to be able to sleep at night. So no, I'm not going to do that. I know it is big, and if I did know, I would probably get even more angry. And the last thing you need is to have how many people fought in Afghanistan? It's 15,000 vets or 32,000 veterans. Really, really angry, more so than they would in the first place. So no, I didn't calculate that, and I'm probably never going to do that, sir. Good question, though.
Merci. Donne pas assez.
Thank you. I don't have enough time. I would have so many other questions. Mr. Chair, I have a little bit of time left, and I would like to ask a question to our analyst. I read the briefing notes for today, and I would like to hear his explanation that the committee could recommend that the designation of special operation be added to special service. Could you explain what that means and how that could move things forward? Go ahead. The current designation is legislated by the Veterans Wellbeing Act for special duty. And this was created to recognize peacekeeping missions from the 50s on, and from the 90s on, there were Canadian operations that had combat elements that were not there during the previous decades. And we were not recognizing the different danger levels, or as we say, the warlike service. The language can be discussed, but there was a designation above special duty. So there would be normal time service outside of operations, and there would be special service and another level that would be combat operations abroad, for example. But why not remove special operations, special service operations, while there are people who fought fires in BC, for example? That's a special operation. And it needs to be recognized as well because of the risk. And within that recommendation, there's a change to amounts given to veterans. That's a completely different question. Wartime service is distinct from access to the different benefits through the Pensions Act and the Wellbeing Act. That's a completely different question that we could look at, but it is a separate question. You talked about risk and danger levels, and how do you see that? This designation would be up to national defense to state that a mission was a combat mission, as Mr. Summers stated earlier. Those who are there know. Just as special service is designated by the department, according to the Chief of Defense Staff, and the designation would be made by the Chief of Defense Staff and sent to the Minister. And why would one accept such a recommendation? I can't answer that, unfortunately. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. I will now give the floor to Mr. Charlie Angus for 6 minutes.
I remember when the what do they call it? The new Veterans Charter came in 2006, just as we were sending so many young people to Kandahar. And the idea of a lump sum pension was going to be somehow better than a proper full life pension. And I thought about it because, I come from mining country. And in the mines, when you're young, you're indestructible and you start to get injured. but of course you're young and indestructible. My office is always full of people who are in their 50s and their 40s where the injuries catch up. And obviously that was going to happen coming out of the war. So we had people who got injured in 2005, as you pointed out, and they got a whole different deal than 2007. How is it that we could get away, Canada could get away with doing something so obviously shortchanging people who are actually going into combat?
So when I go like this and I look at my rank and I'm like a Master Corporal at that point in time, we knew we were getting shortchanged, and we knew it would have lifelong impacts. But we still did the missions anyways. We weren't fully cognizant or aware of the scope or breadth of the change. As a matter of fact, nobody was. Nobody was aware of how much of an impact the NVC would have on those suffering from injuries of whatever it is, or that needed care after service. Okay? The impact of that wasn't known until recently. And so I guess I don't really have an answer for that other than what I just said is, if we would have known what we know now that we should have known then, it would have been dumped. But for someone somewhere, there was a benefit. For someone somewhere, it sounded like a good idea. And as I said for you, as I said for the Canadian government right now, the impact for everybody here is you're seeing these changes now. You're seeing that there's a recruiting problem for all uniformed services. But for national defense, it is a big, big problem. You're getting a higher turnover. When you get a higher turnover, you have a lot more brain drain. You have a lot less ability to have that experience to go from one mission to the next mission, from one war or conflict or whatever it is to the next, and take those experiences to keep the casualty rates low, to keep the injuries low. Gulf War was a phenomenal success because you had people that had 30 years of experience that went in and led that stuff, that did these things. So Mr. Summers went in with how many years of experience prior to? Now imagine somebody only going in with 10 years experience leading in a whole combat team or a brigade or a division. You're going to have a lot of casualties regardless. So again, with this new Veterans Charter, it is affecting, and we're seeing the long-term effects of recruiting and morale. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yes, I guess it's because it's compounded by, I mean, the weasel language. You know, I remember the veteran who stopped me at the Cobalt Legion, and I thanked him for his service, and he said, "For what?" I said, "Well, you fought in the Korean War," and he goes, "Aha, I fought in the Korean War, but it wasn't a war." And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "It was a police action." And I said, "What does that mean?" And he goes, "Well, that was the weasel language that robbed me of a proper pension." Right. And I remember the fight to change that, but now we've got special duty, we've got all kinds of language. But the fact is, you're facing combat, and I think of the situation at Medak Pocket, which was, you know, the biggest land battle the Canadians fought since Korea, and it was heavily traumatic. I don't even know what language they used for that, but that was war. That was full-on war. And yet people come home, those units were broken up. They were not recognized for what they were done. I mean, you talk about the fine print. I mean, the fine print has to be that when you serve the country, we look after you. It should be that simple, whatever the cost, because the cost is paid, and it has been paid in the lives of the people that we send to represent us, to do the best, which they always do.
Mr. Angus, you talked about something there, and I'm sorry, it didn't, but I have to say this now before I forget, is we will never leave a soldier behind. However, the Canadian Armed Forces and Veterans Affairs, or the Government of Canada, the way they word it right now, will abandon your ass, no problem, to save money, because it comes down to money. At the end of the day, the only thing we can think of is the new Veterans Charter. When we look at the two numbers, are very, very different. When we look at the levels of service provided, it looks very different. And it's all to say, at the end of the day, it really, truly had to have come down to, the only way it makes sense is it had to come down to save some money.
Absolutely.
But at the end of the day, you're going to pay more to recuperate and to fix that problem than if you just left it the way it was properly the first time.
Right. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your testimony. And on behalf of members of the committee and myself, I'd like to say thank you to you as an individual. So we had with us Mr. John Senior, c'est un caporal chef à la retraite. Merci beaucoup. And for Thursday, we're going to have Sean Brier and Louise Richard for the committee, at the committee. So everything is okay. So thank you. I'd like to say thank you to our interpreters, technician, clerk, analyst. Meeting is over. Meeting is adjourned.